Hello friends, this is David Sami with A Christian Journey. This past weekend, I had the pleasure of talking to a wonderful Christian lady from Canada, and she shared with me about her experiences during the pandemic years in Canada and how the country reacted toward the pandemic. She felt very strongly from the Lord that she should not get the shot. But that decision eventually brought her into conflict with her workplace because her work mandated that everyone should be vaccinated. And she had to choose whether to get the shot or risk losing her job. She decided to remain true to her conviction and not take the shot, even though many co-workers accused her of being selfish and how she's making a big mistake. Even many Christian friends were critical of her choice. But during this time, many churches in her area were closed, and she was not even able to talk to a friend of 20 years because of her friend's husband's fear of getting COVID-19. But she ended up being isolated and shut out of society, having to figure out how to support herself. But through it all, God was faithful and met all her needs and pulled her through. Now, 2 years later, looking back, it wasn't so much her, but in our discussion, we brought up the subject, was it worth it? Did I make the right choice? Because it costed her so much. It costed her job that she held for 20 years, all the security that came with it, the money that she was making. She turned her back on many things. But now, looking back, was it the right choice? Did she make the right choice by not taking the shot? And after listening to her experience, I thought it may be beneficial to reflect on her choice and its consequences, because there are maybe many lessons here that we could draw from and evaluate how should we proceed to make decisions in times of crisis. Our goal here is not to say whether we should have taken the shot or not. This is a matter of personal choice. But what we want to do here is simply, again, reflect on our decision and see what are some of the takeaways. I came up with 5 things to consider. Number 1, the question is, did she make a right choice? How do we decide what is the right course of action in these kind of situations? In today's world, it's very easy to get manipulated, both from the outside as well as from the Christian community, as well as the inside, because there are many people in Christian community who would always exaggerate, or they always blow things out of proportion, and we make decisions based on what they say and we go off track. So it is very easy to get manipulated today. But she made her decision based on honoring God and doing what she thought the Lord wanted her to do. During times of crisis, it's easy to allow fear to determine the course of our action. But fear, it distorts our vision. It prevents us from seeing clearly. And we usually end up making decisions to avoid the perceived consequence. I think one of the first things that we should consider is we should make our decisions based on glorifying God, honoring God, and being faithful to Him and to His Word. But most of us, we make our decision based on self-interest, based on opportunities and what people think of us. If we truly make honoring God and being faithful to Him as the goal of our lives, it really helps to clarify our path in life, even in times of crisis. Again, we are not here to decide whether she made the right choice or not, but to the best of her ability, she made the choice based on what she believed that the Lord would have her do, and in her case was to not to take the shot. Now, the second question is, what if being true to God would end up costing us our jobs and our securities in life? Should we still go ahead and do it? See, she had to choose between being faithful to Lord or keeping her high-paying job, which she has done for 20 years, and all the security that it provided. It's easy to say, well, we want to be faithful to God, but usually the what-ifs of life intimidates us. How are we going to find a job that would pay us the same money? What are we going to do about healthcare? What are we going to do about retirement? What if something goes wrong? How am I going to be able to pay my bills? All of these what-ifs of life intimidate us to do what we truly believe in our heart that we should do, or what the Lord wants us to do. But you see, sometimes even during these times, we may ask the Lord for a sign. Lord, can you really make it clear what I should do? Where all along in our hearts of heart, we know what the Lord wants us to do, or what we have become convinced of. But usually we don't want to take that path because the cost is too high. All those what ifs intimidate us. And many times during these times, there will be no sign. Because in reality, the Lord would stand back. And in a sense, the ball is in our court. How do we choose? Do we choose to be faithful to the Lord as best as we know how, or to the path that we believe in? Or do we allow the fear of what ifs, the fear of men, and the fear of uncertainty of things in life deter us from those decisions to make the right choice? In my own personal life, every time I compromised what the Lord wanted me to do, I end up regretting it. Because in a long run, it is much more fulfilling when we look back and see we remained faithful to the Lord and His will for us. And the Lord says, to the faithful, I show myself faithful. When we talk about the love of God or faithfulness of God, these are things to be experienced in our journey. Even the power of God in our lives is to be experienced in the struggles of life. The key to all of us is to be faithful, doing what we believe is God's honoring and being faithful to Him. Now, other people may look at the same situation and draw a different conclusion, and that's fine. That's their choice. But to be true to one's conviction based on honoring God and wanting to be faithful. But how often we miss seeing the power of God in our life, His faithfulness and His love, because we allow the what-ifs of life to intimidate us from being faithful to the Lord. The number 3 question is, when other believers disapprove of our choice, it was very sad to see how many Christians were turned on one another. How many Christians began to take sides, one side against the other, rather than simply agreeing that, okay, we take a different path. It's one thing to have some unbelievers begin to condemn the Christians for making the choices that they make. But it was very sad to see how many Christians, how many family members, how many co-workers that we know for a long time, they began to turn on one another and almost having bad things to say or having hard feelings even, just because some people decided not to get the shot. They felt like this is what the Lord would want them to do. We should always remain faithful to what we are convinced of. But if another Christian brother or sister have come to a different conclusion, we should hear their reasoning, we should hear them out, and we should never turn on them. It's very easy to manipulate masses in society, and it's usually done in two ways. One is with fear, and the other one is with guilt. And maybe both of these were at play during this pandemic. The question number 4 is, should the churches close their doors during these times? I know that for many churches it was a great struggle, because on one hand you had the mandate from the local authorities to close the churches, that people could not gather in groups just out of fear of contracting the virus. And there is certain amount of maybe right in that. But also at the same time, I think there are boundaries that the government can pronounce certain action that would be served for the purpose of keeping people healthy, and that should be taken into consideration. But there is also the other side, where the church is really the group of people who are living under a monarchy, and the monarchy is really Christ. He is our king. We live in different countries and we want to honor what the authorities tell us to do. But when they begin to dictate to church what it ought to be done and what it ought not to be done, and if there is ever a command that would go against what Christ says or what the Bible commands us to do, that's, I think, where we need to draw the line. I know I have talked to people from Russia that when they lived under communism, it was illegal for them to get together, to have Christian service. And one lady told me that sometimes in a wintertime, in Russia's wintertime, they would go away into the woods and have services there. Now, even here, during the time of this pandemic, I recognize that there are some of us who may not have felt comfortable to be among other people just out of fear of contracting the virus. And that's fine. Then we should stay home and maybe watch online or things of that nature. But then there are those people who wanted to be there. And I think, again, this comes down to pastor choices and how they see fit. But I think we should be able to provide services and Christian fellowship for those who want to be there. Maybe take precautionary measure to be separated and have enough safe distancing from one another, but at the same time not neglecting getting together, not neglecting our fellowship with one another. And that's where I would at least draw the line, that the government cannot dictate to church what it can do or can't do. That's the time we basically are free to not obey the government, because the government has overstepped its bounds. So again, if you have a different conviction, you should hold on to that. But I simply believe that there comes time sometimes that we need to evaluate whether we should comply or not, and let the chips fall where they may. Now, the question number 5 is, did I make the right choice? Now, 2 years later, did I make the right decision? Was it all worth it? You see, sometimes when we go ahead and things quiet down and we have paid a high price to following the Lord, it's easy to look back and wonder whether it was worth it or not. Did I make a right choice? Was it even that big of a deal? But at the time, we really had to really act. And this lady really at the time believed that this is what the Lord wanted her to do. So she made that decision based on that knowledge. But we don't want to fall into a temptation of what the Israelites fell into when they went into the wilderness. And after a while, they remember all the good things of Egypt. They remembered the meat, onions, pomegranates, everything that they had, and then wish that, we were still in Egypt. But God had a better plan for them. God wanted to take them to a land that's going to be much better. They were just simply in the middle of the road. And sometimes when we sacrifice some things to be faithful to the Lord, we could fall into the same temptation. But I think our last chapter has not been written yet. And I wholeheartedly believe the greatest quality of life would be the result of us living according to our convictions. It takes a certain amount of courage to live according to what you believe, but to be able to look back in one's life and see that to the best of my ability, I had many shortcomings. There were many times that I compromised, but there were times that I truly felt that the Lord wanted me to do something, and I was willing to sacrifice to answer that call. I was willing to let go and not worry about what ifs of life, because I cherish the Lord more than those what ifs. I valued being faithful to Him more than all the fears or all the wanderings. So I think that would be a life that is well lived, when one lives according to their conviction. And happy are them when they don't feel condemned because of the choices that they made, because they took the easy way out. And again, this is not to condemn anyone. We are not here talking about whether we should have done it or should have not done it, but simply to examining her decisions and what she had to go through, and some of the things that came up during our discussion, whether it was worth it or not. But through it all, I think the Lord was faithful to her. The Lord provided other jobs. The Lord provided her for her to be able to support herself. But I think again that I really admire her choice, because she was trying to be faithful to the Lord even when it costed something. But I think as we go forward, this might have been a good test run for us to see how easy it is for the masses to get manipulated, how easy it is to make a certain group in population to become almost like untouchable, to become the people who are become targeted just simply because of the choices they make. And for us not to fall into that temptation when maybe the next pandemic would come around or the next situation would arise itself, but to be faithful to the Lord, to love God above all of these things, and be able not to be afraid to put our hand in the hand of God and go into the future, and whatever it would be, and consider whatever the cost was with joy, because of the reward that would be waiting for us in heaven. So, some thoughts and reflection on the choices that this one lady made in Canada. Until the next time, may the Lord be with you. May He watch over you. May He be gracious to you and make His face to shine upon you. This is David Sami with A Christian Journey.